Train surfing, also known as train hopping or train hitching, is the act of riding on the outside of a moving train, tram, or another rail transport. In a number of countries, the term train hopping is used synonymously with freight hopping, which means riding on the outside of a freight train, while train surfing can be practiced on any type of train. This type of traveling can be dangerous and even life-threatening, because there is a risk of death or serious injury from falling off a moving train, electrocution from power supply, overhead catenary wire, current collectors, resistors, etc., colliding with the railway infrastructure, bridges, tunnels, platforms, railway signals or other trains, while riding outside off-structure gauge on the side or on the roof of a train, or unsuccessful attempts to jump on a moving train or off it. Today, the practice is forbidden by statutes on many railroads in the world. Despite this, it is still practiced, especially on those railroads where the trains are overcrowded. The phenomenon of riding on the outside of trains came with the appearance of the first railway lines. On a series of first railroads, riding on rooftops and footboards of trains was common, but over time, starting from the second half of the 19th century, with an increase in the sizes and speed of trains, passenger coaches began to be produced fully covered and insulated from streets with a placement of all passenger seats inside carriages in order to improve the safety of passengers and prevent people falling from a moving train. However, some individuals continued riding on the outside of trains to travel without having a ticket. In the United States, this became a common means of transportation following the American Civil War as the railroads began pushing westward, especially among migrant workers who became known as hobos. It continued to be widely used by those unable to afford other transportation, especially during times of widespread economic dislocation such as the Great Depression. In the first half of the 20th century, during the era of trams rising in Europe and USA, trams in some cities became overcrowded, so some passengers began a practice of riding on footboards, doors, couplers, and sometimes on the roofs of trams. Also, train surfing often occurred in European countries during the war conflicts, especially during the First World War, Russian Civil War, and World War II. Soldiers and refugees often traveled on the roofs of carriages due to lack of seats inside. In the mid-20th century, European and American railroad companies in many countries took measures to reduce overcrowding in cars and prevent riding outside of them, so the prevalence of train surfing in those countries decreased. However, in some countries of Southeast Asia and Africa with a high population density, the problem of overcrowding of different vehicles, including trains, grew rapidly, so train surfing in those countries became a widespread phenomenon. As an extreme hobby, train surfing firstly appeared in South Africa during the 1980s among teenagers from poor families, and then began to appear in other countries around the world. A story from Associated Press dated June 17, 1988, out of Rio de Janeiro reports how teenagers as young as 13 had taken up surfing atop train cars in Brazil. Reporter Jorge Medeiros stated that some 150 train surfers were killed in Brazil in 1987, at least 40 in the first half of 1988. According to the article, hundreds more were injured, some permanently paralyzed. The report also states that the government company that runs the commuter lines had paid the equivalent of $700,000 in death and injury claims. During the 1990s, train surfing on a commuter electric multiple unit train became popular in Europe among young people who lived near railway lines. In Germany, the practice of S-Bahn surfing was made popular during the 1990s. The phenomenon was forgotten until the millennium, but in 2005 it was rediscovered by a group of train surfers from Frankfurt, Germany. The leader of the crew, who calls himself the Train Rider, surfed the Intercity Express, the fastest train in Germany. An internet video claimed that he died a year later from an incurable form of leukemia, but later the train rider revealed in an interview that this video was made by a fan and the story of his death was a hoax. In 2008, 40 teenagers died in Germany because of train surfing. In the Soviet Union during the 1980s, teens and youth sometimes surfed trams. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the practice of surfing on electric multiple unit trains appeared during the 1990s in Russia and some other post-Soviet countries due to economic crisis and growing of interest for extreme recreational activities among teens and youths who live near the railroads. At the beginning of 21st century, they also began to surf subway trains in Moscow metro in organized train surfing crews and web communities. In the mid-2000s, a problem of frequent cancellation of commuter trains and crowding inside rail cars appeared in the Moscow region. In summer 2010, dozens of commuter trains were cancelled due to track repairs on the Moscow Railway, So the crowding of trains and number of train surfers in Moscow region has risen dramatically. It was the first time when a train surfing became a wide phenomenon in modern Russian railways, and it caused a big scandal. Train surfing was mostly a teenager hobby before this. After the railroad reconstruction, the situation became stable and the cases of roof riding among the ordinary passengers disappeared. However, roof riding became more popular among the teenagers, who began to create a community of train surfers and posting videos on YouTube. Train surfers began to organize meetings and big wave surfing events on outside of commuter, subway, and local freight trains via the internet. Russian train surfing fans began to call themselves as zatsupers, from the Russian word zatsupitsia translated as to catch on. The train surfing became a something like extreme sport discipline for them. Russian train surfers also named their hobby zatsuping. From the beginning of 2011, Russian train surfers made several rides on outside of a high-speed Siemens Valero train Sapsan, the fastest train in Russia. In 2011, over 100 people were killed or seriously injured in Russia because of train surfing or climbing on roofs of standing trains too close to overhead catenary wires. A few dozen children train surfers were killed. In Indonesia, especially Greater Jakarta, large numbers of people train surf, especially since the late 1990s, as gridlock grips this metropolis of 30 million without a single metro system, and the city comes up with alternative transport such as car jockeys. Jakarta traffic is the most gridlocked in Southeast Asia, perhaps among the worst worldwide. It has built bus rapid transit, but with little success, as there is no separation from the heavy traffic. The tropical heat and urban heat island effect also makes the top the only place on the train with plenty of air circulation. Since 2013, the practice has been eliminated after the state railway company modernized the ticketing system, allowing ticket to be sold up to 90 days in advance, and including check-in requirements along with increasing number of rolling stocks. On commuter services, stations are modernized by installing turnstile, implementing contactless payment and locking down the station. All non-commuter trains now have passenger limit of 100 to 110%, while previously a service could run at 200% or more capacity. Train surfing is a common and usual way to ride trains in countries such as India, Bangladesh, and South Africa, where this type of riding by trains is compelled due to the high population density and severe overcrowding of trains. This practice is a serious issue in these countries where people have been killed or injured in numerous accidents. However, train surfing can occur in any area with trains and trams. Individuals may train surf to avoid the cost of a ticket or as a recreational activity. With the creation of the internet, the practice of filming the act and posting online videos of it is on the increase worldwide. Train surfers can use social networks to find and communicate with each other and organize trips by trains in small groups. In countries where a big community of train surfers exists, they sometimes organize major events of riding on the outside of local trains, where dozens of riders participate. Some railroad workers, such as shunters or conductors, are often allowed to ride on exterior parts of trains during shunting operations, but with many limitations. Passengers who practice train surfing consider it as an extreme hobby, or to get a free ride by train, which has a number of advantages in comparison with riding inside a rail car. Enjoyment of riding and feeling of speed. Extended view of surrounding area in comparison with the view from a window inside a rail car. Opportunity to avoid the cost of a ticket. Opportunity to ride in comfort when a train is extremely crowded. Opportunity to ride a train which simply has no room for more people, need to go to work. Opportunity to ride in comfort when there is a strong heat inside rail cars. Opportunity to catch a departing train or jump from an arriving train at low speed before a complete stop. Opportunity to ride on a train which does not provide transportation of passengers, for example on a freight train, service train, single locomotive, etc. Train surfers are at risk of injury or death from falling, striking wayside objects, or electrocution. Electrocution from overhead lines is a risk whilst on top of a train. As well as health risks, train surfers may also face prosecution by the railway police and guards. Train surfing is illegal on most railways in the world, with some exceptions. Many railroad companies usually take a zero-tolerance policy to practice of riding on exterior parts of trains, and employ railway police and guards in an attempt to prevent the practice. Police officers and guards usually patrol the territory of large passenger stations and freight yards, and can arrest train surfers if they are spotted. In some countries, Railway police can patrol the territory of railways in utility trucks, SUVs, bullmobiles, or even standard police cars. In countries where the practice of train surfing occurs regularly, the police frequently organize raids in order to detect and remove surfers off the trains and arrest them. The most common form of penalty for train surfers is a fine. However, in some countries, such as the United States or Canada, train surfers can be not only fined, but imprisoned too. At least 87 people were arrested in the last 4 months of 2010 in Melbourne for offenses relating to train surfing. In Russia, over 1,000 train surfers were arrested at the Moscow Railway during 10 months of 2011. In India, 153 people were prosecuted in a single day in June 2012 for train surfing on the Central Railway. To reduce the practice of riding on the outside of trains, railway companies often place signs that warn about the dangers of train surfing. While there are no official numbers, the London Underground ran a public awareness campaign against tube surfing. The Indonesian railway company, PT Kereta API, has tried several methods to deter train surfers. Early methods included hosing those caught with red paint and placing barbed wire on train roofs. In 2012, the company began suspending concrete balls above the railway, a short distance from the stations. This method was criticized as being potentially lethal. Freight Train Riders of America. Rail Fan. Surfing Soweto, a 2010 South African documentary about train surfing. McKay, Lindsay, 2009, an exploratory qualitative study of young, black men's involvement in train surfing, PDF, University of KwaZulu-Natal, P121.